Pregnant and cast out, she slept in the church belfry. A sheriff climbed up to fetch her. The bell rope was still swaying when I got there. Not much, just a slow drift like something had bumped it in the dark and the air hadn't settled yet. I stood in the nave with my lantern and looked up through the trap in the loft floor, and I could see her boot. One boot, the sole worn through at the heel, hanging over the edge of the boards. I didn't call up. I just stood there a moment and listened, and I heard her breathing slow and careful, the way a person breathes when they're trying not to be heard. It was the 17th of December, cold enough that my breath made ghosts in front of the lantern. I set the light on the nearest pew, and I climbed. The ladder was old pine, 3 rungs missing in the middle stretch. I went up on the outside edges where the wood held better, and I came through the trap into the belfry, and the wind cut straight through the slatboards on all 4 sides. She was curled against the far wall behind the bell housing, wrapped in a horse blanket that still had the brand on it, Kessler's livery brand, rust brown on canvas. She had her knees drawn up best she could, which wasn't much, her belly being what it was. Her eyes were open and watching me. She didn't say anything. Neither did I for a bit. Her name was Maren Halst. I knew her from when her husband, Court, was alive. I knew her mostly by sight, she kept to herself, and Court Halst had been the kind of man other men gave a wide berth to. Not violent exactly, just closed. After he died of a fever in September, the town had done what it does, waited to see what she'd do, then decided for her. The Halst ranch went to Court's brother, Delmer, who came down from Laramie with a bill of sale that may or may not have been legitimate and a face like a door slamming. He gave her 3 days, took the wagon, took the horse, left her the blanket, which was Kessler's to begin with and wasn't his to leave. That was 6 weeks ago. I had not done enough. That's a plain fact, and I have carried it. I crouched down across from her. Up close I could see her lips were cracked. Her left hand had a raw knuckle, split from the cold. I said, "I'm going to take you somewhere warm." She looked at me the way a stray animal looks at a man who's reached out too many times before pulling back, measuring, deciding. "The Delmer business is settled," I said. That was a lie. It was half settled maybe, but she didn't need the other half right now. She didn't move right off. She asked me how long I'd known she was up here. I told her 2 days, which was true. Mrs. Aldrin, who lived across from the church and couldn't mind her own business if you paid her to, had sent her boy to tell me there was a woman sleeping in the belfry. I had come over that same evening, looked up through the trap, seen the blanket, and gone back to the office to think. 2 days of thinking. I am not proud of it. "It's cold," she said, meaning it as a fact, not a complaint. "It is," I said. She sat up, and I saw how much effort that took. She was maybe 7 months along, maybe 8. I didn't know enough about such things to be sure. She had her coat buttoned all the way up, and the coat was a man's coat, too large, the cuffs turned back twice. I don't know where she'd gotten it. I said, "Can you make the ladder?" She said she could. She couldn't, not really, but she was too proud to let me carry her until she'd tried. She made it down the first 3 rungs, and then her arms started shaking, and I came up alongside her and got my arm across her back, and we went down together like that, slow, me keeping my weight away from her so she had the ladder to herself while my arm stayed there. She didn't say thank you. She just breathed. At the bottom she stood still for a moment with her hand on the last rung. We walked out through the nave and into the street. It was past 10 o'clock. The town was dark. The snow that had been threatening all week had started, just fine stuff, not really sticking yet, more like the air was full of cold lace. I took her to the Deacon house. Ruthie Deacon was a widow herself, ran a boarding house on Spruce Street, and she had come from tough stock. I had done her a service 2 winters back, a matter involving a man who wouldn't leave and a promissory note that wasn't worth the paper it was signed on. I had never collected on that. I collected on it that night. I knocked on Ruthie's door at 10:15, and she answered in her robe with a lamp and took one look at Maren Halst and said, "Bring her in." She put Maren in the back room, which had the good stove. She gave her soup from what was still on the back of the range and made her eat it sitting down. I stood in the doorway and watched Marin eat. She ate carefully, not fast, even though I could tell she hadn't eaten much that day. She held the bowl in both hands. Her knuckles were white around it, not from cold. She was just holding something real and warm, and she wasn't going to let go. I went back to the office. The Delmer business was not settled. Delmer Halst was in town, had been since Monday. He was at the Criterion, spending whatever he'd gotten for Court's good horses. I had gone to see him on Tuesday with the county registrar's copy of Court and Marin's marriage record and the homestead filing, which named Marin as co-holder. Delmer had looked at that paperwork and at me and said, quite pleasantly, that the ranch was his and that if I pressed the matter he'd make it unpleasant for the both of us. He was a big man. He had friends in Laramie who were not the kind of friends a county sheriff found useful. I am 61 years old. I have a knee that locks up in cold weather and a shoulder that hasn't worked right since '74. I have been sheriff of this county for 19 years, and I intend to die in it. I went back to the Criterion at 11 o'clock. I won't go through all of it. There were words. There was a moment where Delmer put his hand on the bar in a certain way, and there were 3 men in the room who weren't sure what was going to happen. I was sure. I had been thinking for 2 days, and I was done thinking. I told Delmer what was going to happen. The county judge was coming through on the 22nd, 5 days from now, and I was going to have Marin Halst and the homestead filing and every piece of paper I could lay my hands on in front of that judge, and the judge was going to decide. And if Delmer wanted to spend the next 5 days making friends with me or making enemies of me, that was his choice. But I would note that I had a tolerably long memory and a fairly short temper when it came to men who put pregnant women in church belfries. I didn't say it loud. I didn't have to. Delmer left for Laramie on the 19th. I have thought sometimes about why he went. Maybe the paperwork was solid and he knew it. Maybe the judge was someone he didn't want to face. Maybe it was just that he looked at me standing there at 11 at night in a cold saloon and saw that I wasn't going to move, and moving me was going to cost more than the ranch was worth. Men like Delmer do their arithmetic. When the number comes out wrong, they go. He went. I filed the papers anyway. Judge Haverson signed off on the 22nd, and the Halst Ranch, all 340 acres of it, was Marin's by law. I had it recorded in the county book. I rode out to tell her myself. She was still at Ruthie's. She'd been helping with the cooking, which Ruthie said she'd tried to stop but couldn't. I came in through the kitchen door the way I'd gotten used to doing. Ruthie had told me to stop knocking, and Marin was at the stove and turned when she heard me, and I held up the folded paper from the county clerk's office, and she went very still. She read it twice, held it in both hands the way she'd held the soup bowl. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, not because she was falling, just because she needed to sit. I poured myself coffee because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Ruthie had made herself scarce, which was decent of her. The stove crackled. Outside, snow was coming down for real now, the big flakes, the kind that stick. Marin said, "You didn't have to do all that." I said, "Yes, I did." She looked up at me then. She had dark eyes, this woman, and she didn't look away when she looked at you. Court Halst had been a fool in more ways than I'd known. "Why?" she said. It was a real question. She wasn't asking to flatter me or to hear me say something gallant. She just wanted to know. I said because it was right, and because nobody else was going to. She nodded slowly, like that was an answer she recognized. We didn't say much else that afternoon. I finished my coffee and told her I'd send someone out to check the ranch house, make sure the stove hadn't frozen, see what shape the place was in for her to go back to. She said she wasn't going back until after the baby came. Ruthie had already told her she could stay as long as she needed. I said that was good. She said yes. I put my hat on and went to the door, and she said my name. "Sheriff Ardell." I turned around. She was still at the table with the county paper in her hands. "Thank you," she said, "not just for this, for climbing up that ladder." I didn't say anything smart. I just nodded and went out. The boy came on January the 4th. A hard night, Ruthie said after that she'd had easier times pulling calves. But Marin was strong, and by morning there was a boy, healthy and loud, which Ruthie said was a very good sign. I heard about it from Doc Fenner when I came in to sign something at the county office. He told me mother and child were both fine, and I said good and went about my day. I rode out to Ruthie's that evening with a bundle of firewood in the wagon, which felt like a useful thing and not too much of a thing. Ruthie let me in. The house was warm and smelled like coffee and something with onions. I could hear the baby from the back room, that thin, angry new sound. Marin was sitting up in bed, which surprised me. The boy was in her arms and she looked tired in a way that went all the way through, but she was sitting up straight. She looked up when I came in the doorway. I said I'd brought firewood. She said she heard. She looked down at the boy, then back at me. "Come in," she said. "I want you to see him." I came in and stood at the side of the bed and looked at the boy. He was red and small and sleeping now, one fist up beside his cheek. Marin's hand was curved around his head. "I'm naming him James," she said. "My father's name." I said that was a good name. "I also thought," she said, and she paused, and I looked up from the baby at her face. She was looking at me directly, no hedging in it. "I thought if you were willing he might have a second name, after you. My name is Calhoun, Cal Ardell." I stood there in the doorway of that room with the cold still on my coat, and I didn't say anything for a moment because I didn't trust what would come out. She said, "You don't have to, She stopped. "There isn't anyone else who did what you did, and I'd like him to carry that." I said, "James Calhoun Halst." "Yes," she said. I sat down in the chair beside the bed. I took off my hat. The fire in the small stove popped and settled. Outside, the wind was moving again, not hard, just present. After a while, Marin said, "The ranch will need work in the spring." I said I expected it would. "I'll need help, someone who knows what they're doing." I said I knew a few men I could send out. She said I meant someone who'd be there regular. I looked at her. She was looking at the boy, but I could tell she was paying attention to me, the way she always was. This woman didn't miss anything, never had. I said I expect I could manage that. She looked up at me then, and there was something in her face that I don't have a word for. Not relief, not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. The way you look at a man when you've decided something, and you want him to know you've decided it, and you're not afraid. She reached out and put her hand over mine where it rested on the chair arm. Just set it there, warm, steady, not like she needed anything, like she was giving something. I turned my hand over and held hers. The boy slept. The stove burned. The wind moved past the eaves and left us alone. I married her in April, after the snow melted enough to get a wagon to the ranch. We fixed the fences first, which seemed right. Judge Haverson came out and did the ceremony by the post oak at the east edge of the property, the one court had used as a corner marker. Ruthie Deacon stood up for Marin. My deputy, a young man named Ferris who I had taught nearly everything he knew, stood up for me. James Calhoun Halst was 3 months old and asleep in Ruthie's arms for the whole of it, which Ruthie said was a blessing because when he was awake he had opinions. The valley talked. I knew they would. I had lived in this county long enough to know what people said about a man my age and a woman her age and a baby who wasn't mine by blood. I let them talk. It ran its course in about 3 weeks, the way talk does when it doesn't get fed. After that, nobody said much. What they said, when they said anything, was that the sheriff had done right by the Halst woman, that he'd stood up when it needed standing and then he'd stayed. A few of the older men, the ones who'd been here as long as I had, gave me a nod when they saw me in town. Not a big nod, Just the kind that means something between men who don't waste words. I took that. Marin never treated me like something she owed. That was the thing. She treated me like a man she'd chosen, which is a different thing altogether. And if you have never had a good woman look at you that way, not grateful, not obligated, just chosen, then I'm not sure I can explain it to you. I will say that I had been a long time without it. Longer than I'd admitted to myself, if I'm honest. The ranch came back. She worked hard, Marin did. Harder than I thought she could right after the birth, and I told her so once, and she looked at me with that flat, direct look, and I didn't say it again. By late spring the garden was in, 2 new calves were on the ground, and she had found, somehow, 3 laying hens from somewhere I never did track down. The house smelled like food in the evenings. There was a lamp on in the window when I rode in from town. I had not had a lamp in a window in 11 years. James grew. By the time he could sit up on his own, he already had a look about him, a specific, considering look, head tilted, watching everything. Marin said he got that from her father. I didn't say anything, but I had seen that look somewhere else. In the mirror when I thought nobody was paying attention. A man takes what the years give him, and he doesn't always expect much. I had stopped expecting. I had done the job, kept the county, ridden the circuit, eaten alone. I had a good horse and a clean office and a deputy I trusted, and I had told myself that was enough. It was not a lie exactly. It was just the arithmetic I was doing with what I had. Then a rope swayed in a cold church, and I climbed a ladder. That's all it was. A swaying rope and a ladder with 3 rungs missing, and a woman who held a soup bowl like it was something worth holding. And then a lot of cold work and a lot of plain words and some paperwork that needed filing and a man who needed to know I wasn't moving. Now there's a lamp in the window. Now there's James, 4 years old and following me around the east pasture in boots that are too big for him, stopping when I stop, looking at what I look at. Now there is Marin standing at the fence in the evening light, watching us come back, and she looks at me across the distance with that look, steady and certain. The one that means she sees me, the whole of me, the worn-down parts and the hard parts and the parts I'm not proud of, and she's not going anywhere. I don't need anything else. I never told anybody the part about the rope swaying, about how I stood in that nave in the dark and looked up and made a choice. It didn't seem like a story worth telling at the time. It was the most important thing I ever did.